Welcome back to This Was Supposed to Be Easy, your go-to podcast for connection, joy, and a good dose of laughter.
Hosted by two friends who've seen enough of life to know that it's never as simple as it sounds
or looks.
Each conversation celebrates the diverse journeys we travel, the moments of bravery, the strength we didn't know we had, and the joy we find along the way.
Because let's be honest, life is full of things that were supposed to be easy, but turned out to be harder.
And definitely funnier
than we thought. This is Amy.
And this is Cheryl. And if it were easy, we wouldn't be here.
Today, we're picking up right where we left off in our conversation about listening. If you haven't listened yet to part 1, we definitely recommend starting there. It sets the stage for everything we're about to dive into. I have so many thoughts about so many of the things you just said.
I did a throw up of all the
No, that's great. You know, I do those all the time. And so I absolutely love that you did. And I think too, just because I need to say it to get it out of my head, one of the things that you actually started to say at the very beginning of all of that, I think deserves attention. And it's that hearing and listening are not the same thing. Mm-hmm. And I think we use them interchangeably in a way that if you think of the fights that you, or the arguments that you get into with people, and you say, I heard you, you're not saying, I listened to you. And so hearing means, yes, you know, there's the vibration on your eardrum, there was noise being made, that type of thought, but listening is taking it into your brain and doing something with it that way. And maybe not, but just as I'm thinking about it, maybe it's even different, but I'm just thinking about like hearing and listening being different.
Well, and often when I say, I hear you, I follow it up with, but I hear you, but what I'm saying is, or I hear you, but, and that is not necessarily listening to hear and to understand and to consider. It is, yes, just like you said, I heard your words. I want you to hear mine.
Right. Yeah.
And sometimes we need that courage to just keep our mouth shut and listen, even if we have opinions about something. Sometimes I want to practice more of not everything I think has to come out of my mouth so that I can be a better listener.
That is a tough one. That is actually one that I've been trying to work on. I'm not an expert on by any means, but I remember a couple years ago, I was in a meeting with this one particular individual who they seemed to have to start every conversation and they had to seem like they had to end every conversation.
My mother told me that was my, like, you have to have the last word all through childhood. So maybe some of those memories are coming back now.
No, I've brought up childhood trauma. I'm very sorry.
I probably caused it. So,
well, and this person was not you. So as I am saying this, but I found myself really frustrated. I was really frustrated in the moment, and in that moment, I said, I don't want to be that person for somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm still not great at it because I was in a meeting the other day and in my head, I was like, a question was asked and I'm like, this was a question asked to the group. I do not need to be the first person to respond. Do not respond. Do not respond. And then it was silence, silence, silence. And I'm like, then the person like asked it a different way and there was silence. And so then I was just like, well, I was waiting for other people to say something, but let me go ahead and jump in. But I was like, nobody's saying anything. Like, I just wanted to save the person who's asking these questions. And then I felt rude, but I'm like, don't be the first person to talk. Don't do that, you know? And I was like, well, I was trying not to be the first person. Then everybody had a good laugh, but I was like, you're not making this practice very easy right now. Because though, that's not the person that I want to be, but I still often find myself like listening and then speaking when I need to continue to try to work on the skill of listening, determining if I have something to speak about, then kind of adding that in if that's appropriate. Like
If it's value added, yeah,
If it's
yeah,
yes, the value added piece is the part that was really where I just wasn't doing well in getting there yet, but it's that value added. Like, am I speaking to hear myself speak, or am I speaking because I have value to add to this conversation? And knowing the difference between the two. I
yeah.
think that is something to think about. And so I also think that there are some things that we do as listening as we think about listening that are kind of almost ingrained, that I often think maybe come from our history of how we were brought up. And some of those are like, are we thinking ahead of the conversation?
Yeah.
I know for myself, and again, I know I mentioned the ADHD. And I say this because I've seen things on it, but I also know, like, I'm the type of person who can watch a movie and usually, 10 minutes in, I'm like, the whole movie's going to play out like this. And I'm always wonderfully happy when it's not, but I have to then still pay attention, right? Being able to not pre-plan out the conversation in my head, but to remain curious of what the person is actually saying, and not being like, why are we still talking about this? I already finished this conversation in my head and you were going to do this, which is unrealistic. And
Mhm.
so then because of that, not jumping in and also redirecting with my own experience, because I think I'm making a connection, but what I'm really doing is hijacking the conversation to have it go where I want it to go. And especially not doing that when it's a conversation I might be uncomfortable with.
Amy, you're reminding me even, and I don't know how deep we want to go with this, but you're reminding me of an experience you've been having in some of your coursework. Gosh, I should be careful, maybe. Anyway, you've experienced lately interactions, group interactions, but there's someone in the interaction who always has to one up
Yes. Yeah. I know what you're talking
whatever someone else has shared. I thought of that when you were sharing right there.
Well, but that's a good trap that I think sometimes fall into, is that one-upmanship when we don't even realize that we're doing it. Like,
We think we're adding to, "Oh, yeah, I've had that experience too," but it becomes almost competitive.
right, right. And I think too, when we are speaking or when we're listening to hear versus listening to compete, or listening to see, how would I would be a part of this,
Mm,
is interesting and it's different. And I think about that when I started really kind of my work on coaching and having to listen. One of the hardest skills for me in learning to listen as a coach was not listening to fix. And I think so many women in my age group, I've mentioned before, I'm mid 40s, because one, either we've been an expert or we've been the one that people have relied on to do the thing for so long, or we're often juggling a million different things. And so, like, of course, just give me, one more thing to fix. I think oftentimes one of the bad habits that can be is listening to say, like, okay, what's the problem? Have you tried? Do you do this? Do you? And I'm still very much developing my skill of not doing that all the time, but listening to listen to hear what the other, again, kind of listening to hear what the other person's saying, ask questions to get curious, but also allowing that other person to come to you just to talk. Like, I used to say to my kids a lot, and I had taught them, and it was really nice. I used to say, how do you want me to show up to this conversation? One of the moments that I was most happy with is, I remember my daughter a few years ago came to me and she said, like, Mom, I just need you to listen. I'm going to need you to help me brainstorm ideas to fix this, but can I have 5 minutes of just complaining? And I said, sure.
mm,
Like,
mm.
because then I knew I didn't need to, in that moment, offer suggestions. Like, sure, that was going to come down the line, but I was just going to listen, to hear her out. And also it gave me the opportunity to recognize that, like, this was really weighing on her. Like, and even if it might have been a situation that I'm like, "Oh, this isn't a big deal. This is teenage angst, or, this is whatever." But she is a teenager and it was a big deal to her. And so I think when we're listening not to fix, it also gives us the opportunity for that meaning making piece. And that part to me is probably one of the most important skills, I think, not only for a coach, but for a for parents, for people in general, is let me make meaning out of what you're saying or not saying of how this was for you. Then when I do respond, I'm not responding with, "Oh, this wasn't a big deal. This is, this is easy. Oh my gosh, you got a 9 out of 10 on your test and you really, wanted a 10 out of 10." Like, come on. This is, you're fine. Or, saying like, "Oh, okay, you got a 5 out of 10. Like, you're going to do better next time." But that's not what they wanted in that moment. They wanted to hear that they studied really hard and they were really frustrated that they didn't get the score that they wanted to, and things weren't going the way that they thought they were going to go. And I don't need you to fix it right now. I just need you to listen that I'm having a hard moment with this.
Quick little commercial for our experiences, things we teach in early childhood, but I'm going to say parenting, right? Like, how beautiful that your consistent use of the message, how do you want me to show up for this conversation, right? Like the first time you say that to a child, they don't know how to answer you, right?
Right.
But if they consistently hear that message, they learn how to tell you what they need. And that's really beautiful to me. And I just think an important thing to highlight in terms of consistency in your messaging with others until they can engage with the ability to share what they actually do want you to be, or who, what they need from you. I suspect, Amy, that there are some tips and ideas lying around somewhere in your mind. Before we get to those, I discovered also in Suzanne's book and chapter on listening, she shared Stephen Covey's levels of listening from the habits of highly effective people. And I don't want to describe them much. I just want to list them for people to think about, maybe
Mhm.
for people to look up and consider. And I know that when I read through it, I saw myself in all of the levels.
Right, at some
And
point.
see, right? So maybe more of the awareness will help me notice when I'm in a level I don't want to be in.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I like that.
So
Okay.
again, this is from Stephen Covey's Levels of Listening from the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So the first one is ignoring, not listening,
Right,
ignoring.
right. Yep.
Pretend listening. So you hear them talking, but you're not actually listening to what's being said. Selective listening. I have used that word to describe other people when probably it's been used to describe me, right? But you listen to only to what interests you or what backs up what you already think. Attentive listening, where you're offering your time and attention to listen to what's being said, but you might not be taking the time to reflect back from the speaker's point of view, which you, I think, just talked about, to hear their point of view. And then finally, that seventh level, or no, 7 is not the right number that I wanted to say, the fifth level, empathic listening, listening with intention, not only to understand what is being said, but also to try to understand their perspective. It's not an easy skill. It's not a permanent, I think it always takes work, but it's something to strive for.
Well, I love that you shared those. And if I can tell a quirky story kind
Of
of
course.
about the selective listening. So my grandmother, who I love her, she's passed on now about 16 years, but she would have selective listening to the nth degree. Like, and especially it became much more pronounced later on in her life where, she would ask a question and then she was never listening to the answer. Like she was already moved on doing something else. And we would get the pretend listening, I think, a lot where it was like, "Uh-huh, uh-huh. Oh, okay. Yes, yes," all of that. So we started, and I think I learned it from my mom, but it was like my mom, my sister, and I, we would insert words like penis in the middle of like the conversation. And then she would be like, "What? What did you say?" And she'd jump back into the conversation. So, as that selective listening is like, oh, when somebody says your name or they say something and you're like then tuned in, like, oh, I should really listen to what they're saying. Those were the words that would like make my grandma rejoin us in the conversation if we would, just spout that out a little bit. Like there were plenty of other ones that are probably not appropriate if you're listening in the car with your children, but sometimes we would have to do that. And then she joined right in and had all the things to like just laugh about. But I was like, "You were not listening, were you?" "Oh, haha, sure I was. I heard you say that." Well, yes, that was the most recent word I said in the whole story. "Oh, well, and then we would go there. So it made me think of the selective and pretend listening that we would
Oh, and I
often
appreciate
have.
the laugh.
Good, good. Yes. But, you had mentioned some practical listening tools, and I do
Yes.
have a couple of them, and they're one of the basic ones that I think about is that pause before responding. Some people I know cannot stand to sit in the silence, but the reason to pause before responding is a couple of different things. It can happen in different ways. You can actually just get really good at it, and then or you can count out in your head. So somebody finishes speaking and you say 1, 2, 3, and that before you speak. But what you're doing is you're giving the person permission to continue with what they're saying. And also, you get those few seconds to not necessarily hijack the conversation to take it where your brain might have been if you weren't like really listening, or if you were only listening to share your story. It's a way for everybody to kind of gather their thought, like by allowing that time. And then another one is,
Wait,
yeah,
before
go
you do
ahead.
another one,
Yes.
I was just thinking about the culture of YouTube and edited videos and edited podcasts. And much of the editing takes out the pause.
Mm.
And I think maybe pushes forward that culture of no pause, right? Because that's how we hear
Interesting.
it. And I've
Yeah.
noticed it. So you and I have talked a couple of times recently about Brene Brown's new book and the relaunch of her podcast. And so at the time of our recording today, there have been 2 new episodes where Brene Brown is talking to Adam Grant. And the thing I've noticed in particular with this listening round of her podcast is that the pauses are left in.
Mm.
And so, as one of them will ask the other a question, they've left in the thinking pause, and there's silence in the podcast. And I notice it because it's so absent from so much of what we hear. And so I
Yeah.
just, before you moved on, while we were still thinking about that pausing before responding, take a listen to one of Brene's newest podcasts and you'll hear it.
Thank you for bringing attention to that. I mean, obviously, I've been listening to them too. And now that you've called attention, I can recognize that, but I don't think I actually thought about that. But you're right. And it is often missing in a lot of other conversations. That's interesting.
Yeah, so you were on the tracks and the train was moving and I probably derailed it. So hopefully you can remember the next piece of advice or tip.
I can.
Okay.
And and because it's one that I teach a lot, and it's the reflection piece. And it's the idea of I I often tell people reflective practice. I teach reflective practice to people all the time, and I always start off with you're not parroting. Like, do not reflect by saying the last 3 words of what somebody else said back to them. Like, it becomes awkward, and people are like, "Yes, I just said that." "Oh, you just said that?" "Yes, I just said that. What are you doing?" Like, type of a thing. But there is something interesting in the reflecting back and the pause together.
Mhm.
So, taking that pause, thinking about what the person just said, and then what's like the core meaning. But the thing that where I think can be really important is if you are reflecting back, and maybe you're reflecting and you're saying, So what I hear you saying is this, or, that was really meaningful for you. It then gives you the confirmation from that other person of like, yes, we're joined without you having to share any personal story yourself in that moment. But what it also does, besides just letting the person know, like, I'm on the same path, it also gives them permission to keep going. Like, you
Mhm,
heard it, they don't need to say it again and again. I
mm,
remember having a conversation, I was part of a group, and this individual was sharing with me how frustrating it was for them, for this other person that was part of the group, that they kept saying the same thing over and over again. And I said, "Well, did you reflect back with them what they were saying? Do you know that they thought they were heard?" And they were like, "No, why would I do that?" Like, I just moved the conversation on, and then they kept bringing it back up. And I said, "Because they didn't know they were heard." Eh,
Amy, I'm sorry, I'm cutting you off.
No, no,
I'm
please
doing
go ahead.
it, but you literally just described what we talk about doing with young children, right? So instead of just giving them empty praise when they show you something, trying to reflect back from their point of view,
Mhm.
which is why you attempt to reflect in a way that includes the emotion you think you're seeing from them or the effort that they've put into the work that they've done. And I can hear myself when our children or other children were in that, especially the 3-year-old phase, right? Like when they're saying it over and over and over again, just looking at my husband and saying to him, just say it back to them. They just need to hear or know that you heard them. And
Right.
and then they can move on, but they're stuck in this endless loop until there's validation that they were heard. And I've always thought of that as the practice of a 3-year-old. Um,
Adults need to learn it too.
Adults, right, like, if you hear an adult repeating, it's because they need validation that you've at least attempted to hear it from their perspective.
And I think then, and if you don't know how to reflect the words, then reflect the emotion.
Mhm,
If you don't know how to say whatever it is that they were, or maybe you don't understand it.
mm,
So, let's say you're at a work meeting and somebody's circling around a concept that's just not in your, like, that's not your area of expertise, then you can always reflect back. That seems to be really frustrating. That was exhausting. Oh my gosh, you worked really hard on that project not to have it come to an ending.
mhm.
Like, you can do any of those things where you can reflect the emotion back if you don't understand the words that somebody was saying. You don't have to move it on because maybe you're uncomfortable that you don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
I would say too, the other things that I want when listening for people to be aware of is nonverbals are often say more than the words people are actually saying, and tone, rate of speech, those are all nonverbals too in this capacity. So am I talking really, really fast because I'm okay, if I'm talking really fast, am I really excited about this? So I just need to tell you because I'm so excited about this. Or am I moving my hands around a lot? Um, am I able to make eye contact with you? Am I showing that I'm comfortable and engaged in the conversation? Or am I doing these things because maybe I'm really uncomfortable in the situation? So am I avoiding eye contact? Or I am going to tell you something that's really hard, and I don't know if I want to watch your face show what I have already preconceived the answer to be,
Mhm,
or the response to be. So, like, am I saying this and it's clearly really hard for me to say this? So I need a little bit of grace.
mhm,
Or, what is it in those nonverbals? Am I really slowing down my speech because I need you to understand this? Or am I pointed in what I'm saying? So I'm using really short terms again because I need you to get this. I need you to understand. This is so important to me. So what are those nonverbals saying that maybe the words aren't saying?
Suzanne says that when you're designing spaces, in this case for learning, right? They need to be rooted in curiosity when you want them to be rooted in curiosity and rooted in joy. And for children, rooted in autonomy, it requires us to listen to the spoken and the unspoken. I'm saying that out loud right now because Amy, you and I and our friend Holly were working on a full day workshop on leading with joy. I think it's very important for us as we move forward in our planning to make sure that if we're thinking about joy and curiosity as a goal, then it's essential that we are working to listen to the spoken and the unspoken, the
I
body
think so
language
too.
that you just talked about,
Yeah,
or the
yeah.
nonverbals you said.
Right. No, I like that, and I think that is important because you can tell a lot about somebody's joy and happiness and feelings through those nonverbals.
Mhm.
I think that that's a key piece. And the last tip I would have for people is, and it goes again to, I mean, all of these things are things we do with children or we hope to do with children, but is ask open-ended questions. And that I think too goes back to the meaning making piece, but I even think of having conversations with my teenagers. And when I say, oh, like maybe I'm even trying to ask an open-ended question, like, tell me about school today. So it's not a yes or no, but fine. I get it's the same as if I asked close-ended question. It allowed them to give me a one-word answer.
Mm.
And I think a couple of things. One, I need to go back to what we first started talking about. Is this the time to have that conversation? Or am I forcing it? But also then if it's not, like if it is the right time to have a conversation, then, how does that dialogue sound? Tell me about tell me about who you were with today at lunch. Tell me about this, but also then you can do it with your significant others, your partners, or your friends. Tell me more about this, or what was that like for you? What have you been thinking about lately? Those things that are bigger, that open up dialogue versus the questions that shut it down. And I think that those invitation questions are one way that we can really ask something. But here's the key piece. If you ask the question, listen to the answer. And also, even if the conversation feels boring, even if the conversation is not the conversation you want to have, you listen to the answer, you watch the body language, you do those things because it is what makes relationships happen. And through all of this, when you develop the skill of listening, what you're really doing is you're improving relationships.
What a beautiful way to end. And I thank you now because I have a colleague that I need to have a conversation with because we've gone back and forth on opinions about something, and it's time for me to listen better.
Thanks for tuning in to This Was Supposed to Be Easy. Remember, the best stories are the ones we live.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and keep the conversation going because life may not be easy, but listening in should be.
Stay curious, stay connected, and keep wondering.